Judge Michael Harrison looked down at the homeless defendant with barely concealed disgust. Another vagrant wasting the court's time on petty theft charges. But as he read the name Officer Daniel Brooks, retired, on the docket, something stirred. In his memory, 20 years ago, a young black officer had saved his life during a convenience store robbery. The same officer now stood before him in tattered clothes, facing a year in prison. Where are you watching this video from? Don't forget to leave your city in the comments as well. Remember, every comment is a voice. Every voice is a change. The Cook County Courthouse buzzed with its usual Monday morning chaos. Lawyers shuffled between courtrooms, defendants sat nervously on hard wooden benches, and the machinery of justice ground forward with bureaucratic efficiency. Room 304 was just another stop on the assembly line. Minor crimes, quick decisions, case after case processed with mechanical precision. Judge Michael Harrison, 58 years old and 23 years on the bench, entered his courtroom with the bearing of a man who had seen it all. His black robes rustled as he settled into his chair, scanning the docket for the day. Petty theft, public intoxication, trespassing, the usual parade of society's forgotten people seeking attention from an overworked system. His eyes stopped on one name: Daniel Brooks, 62, retired police officer. Theft of food items, 14, 67. Harrison sighed. Another fallen cop. They showed up in his courtroom regularly now, men who'd once worn the badge with pride, reduced to stealing to survive. The opioid crisis, PTSD, economic hardship, he'd heard all the sob stories. His job wasn't to solve society's problems, it was to enforce the law. The bailiff called the courtroom to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Michael Harrison. Harrison took his seat and began processing cases with efficient detachment. DUI, domestic disturbance, shoplifting. Each defendant received his attention for exactly as long as justice required. No more, no less. Case number 2023 CM 4847, the clerk announced. People of Illinois versus Daniel Marcus Brooks. The bailiff brought forward the defendant, and Harrison looked up from his paperwork for the first time in an hour. What he saw made him pause. The man standing before him was tall, but stooped, his shoulders bent under the weight of circumstances rather than age. His clothes were clean, but obviously second-hand. A jacket too large, pants too worn, shoes held together with duct tape. His hair was graying and unkempt, his face weathered by exposure and hardship, but it was his eyes that caught Harrison's attention. Despite everything, they held dignity, intelligence, the unmistakable bearing of someone who had once commanded respect. Daniel Brooks, 62 years old, stood in handcuffs before the bench. 30 years as a Chicago police officer had ended 5 years ago with a medical retirement he'd never wanted. Since then, life had been a steady descent into a hell he'd never imagined possible. The PTSD had started after his third officer involved shooting. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the inability to sleep without checking every door and window 3 times. The department therapist had helped for a while, but 30 years of accumulated trauma couldn't be healed in weekly sessions. Then came the injury, a back injury sustained during a foot chase that left him with chronic pain and mounting medical bills. Workers' compensation had been denied due to a technicality. His pension application had been tied up in bureaucracy for 2 years. His savings had evaporated, then his house, then his car. Rock bottom had arrived on a Tuesday morning when he'd been caught stealing a sandwich, a bag of chips, and a bottle of water from a convenience store. Total value, $14.67. The same amount that now represented the difference between freedom and a year in county jail. Mr. Brooks, Judge Harrison said, glancing at the paperwork, you're charged with retail theft under $50. How do you plead? Daniel's public defender, tired-looking woman named Sarah Martinez, stepped forward. Your Honor, my client pleads guilty, but requests the court's consideration of his circumstances. Harrison nodded curtly. Proceed, Your Honor. Mr. Brooks is a 30-year veteran of the Chicago Police Department. He suffers from service-related PTSD and chronic pain from an on-duty injury. He's been homeless for 8 months due to pension complications and medical debt. He was stealing food because he hadn't eaten in 3 days. Harrison had heard variations of this story hundreds of times. While he felt a measure of sympathy, the law was clear. Theft was theft, regardless of motivation. Mr. Brooks, Harrison addressed the defendant directly. Do you have anything to say before sentencing? Daniel looked up, meeting the judge's eyes for the first time. Your Honor, I served the city for 30 years. Badge number 2847. I never thought I'd end up on this side of the law. Judge Harrison's pen stopped moving. Badge number 2847. That number was etched in his memory like a scar. Daniel Brooks straightened slightly, finding some echo of his old posture. Your Honor, not here to make excuses. I stole food because I was hungry. That's against the law, and I know it better than most people in this room. He paused, his voice taking on the measured tone of someone who had testified in hundreds of courtrooms. I served this city for 30 years. Badge number 2847. I've arrested people for the same crime I'm guilty of today. I never thought I'd end up on this side of the law. But here we are. Judge Harrison's pen stopped moving. Badge number 2847. The number hit him like a physical blow, dragging him back 20 years to a night he tried his best to forget. October 15th, 2003. He'd been Assistant District Attorney Michael Harrison, then 38 years old, and working late on a case that would make his career. He'd stopped at Tony's convenience store on 5th Street for coffee and energy drinks, planning to work through the night. He was standing at the register, counting change, when two men burst through the door with guns drawn. Nobody move. Everybody on the ground. The image flashed through Harrison's mind with startling clarity. The terrified store clerk, the smell of fear and desperation, the cold barrel of a gun pressed against his temple. As one of the robbers realized he just found the jackpot, a prosecutor with expensive clothes and a wallet full of credit cards. This is your lucky day, Mr. Lawyerman, the gunman had whispered. You're coming with us. That's when the door chimed again. A young police officer had entered, probably just stopping for coffee, like Harrison himself. He was black, maybe 28 or 30, with the alert eyes of someone who recognized danger instantly. Badge number 2847, Chicago PD. Drop your weapons. What happened next had lasted maybe 30 seconds, but felt like hours. Gunfire, shouting, the young officer pushing Harrison behind the counter and taking a bullet in the shoulder that had been meant for the prosecutor's head. By the time backup arrived, both robbers were down, and the young officer was applying pressure to his own wound, more concerned about Harrison's welfare than his own injury. Harrison had never learned the officer's name. In the chaos of the aftermath, statements, reports, media attention, he'd somehow never gotten the chance to properly thank the man who'd saved his life. The case had launched his career, leading eventually to his appointment to the bench, but the debt he owed to that unnamed officer had haunted him for 20 years. Badge number 2847. Judge Harrison looked up from his paperwork, really seeing the defendant for the first time. The face was older, weathered by 2 decades and hardship, but the eyes were the same calm courage, the same quiet dignity. Officer Brooks, Harrison said slowly, his voice catching slightly. Badge number 2847. Daniel nodded, confused by the judge's sudden interest in details that seemed irrelevant to his sentencing. Did you ever work the South District? Around 5th Street? Yes, sir. That was my beat for about 5 years in the early 2000s. Harrison's heart was pounding. Do you remember the night of October 15th, 2003? Tony's convenience store? Daniel's eyes widened in recognition, but not the kind Harrison expected. That was the night everything changed, Daniel said quietly. I saved a prosecutor's life, but I also took 2 lives. The PTSD started that night. The nightmares. Everything. That led me here. Daniel's expression changed. The professional mask slipped, revealing something raw and painful underneath. October 15th, he repeated slowly. Tony's store. The robbery. You remember? I remember everything about that night. Your Honor, every detail. It's one of the reasons I'm standing here today. Harrison felt the courtroom around him fade away. The clerk, the bailiff, the handful of spectators, they all became background noise as 20 years of guilt and gratitude crashed together. You saved my life that night, Harrison said, his voice barely above a whisper. And I took 2 lives, Daniel replied, with equal quiet. 2 young men who were probably as desperate as I am now. That's when the nightmare started. That's when everything began to fall apart. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Daniel continued, his voice taking on the hollow tone of someone recounting trauma. I got a commendation for that night. Medal of Valor. They called me a hero. But heroes don't spend 20 years waking up screaming, seeing the faces of 2 kids who died because they made bad choices. He looked directly at Harrison. "The department gave me counseling for 6 months. Said I was fine, fit for duty. But you don't just get over something like that. You carry it with you every day." Harrison felt his throat tighten. He'd built his career on that night, prosecuted dozens of cases, sent criminals to prison, eventually ascending to the bench. Meanwhile, the man who'd made it all possible had been slowly drowning in trauma. "The injury came later," Daniel continued. "Chasing a suspect through an alley. Fell down a fire escape. Messed up my back pretty good. That's when the pain medication started, then the addiction, then everything else fell apart." Harrison leaned forward, his judicial composure completely abandoned. "Officer Brooks." "Daniel, I had no idea. Why would you? You went on to become a prosecutor, then a judge. You probably saved more lives with the law than I ever did with a badge." "I went home that night and started having nightmares that never stopped." Harrison stood up from the bench, his robes rustling in the silent courtroom. "Officer Brooks, 20 years ago you saved my life at considerable cost to your own. Today, you're standing trial for stealing $14 worth of food." His voice broke. "This is not justice." Judge Harrison stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor in the silent courtroom. For 23 years on the bench, he had maintained professional distance, judicial neutrality, the cold impartiality that justice required. "Not today. Officer Brooks," he said, his voice carrying through the courtroom. 20 years ago, you saved my life. You took a bullet that was meant for me. You ended a robbery that could have resulted in multiple deaths." He gestured at the charges on his desk. "Today, you're standing trial for stealing $14.67 worth of food because you were hungry." Harrison's voice began to break. "This is not justice." The public defender looked confused. The prosecutor seemed unsure whether to object. The bailiff had never seen a judge step down from the bench during proceedings. Harrison continued, his eyes locked on Daniel's. "You suffered PTSD from that night. You were injured in the line of duty. You became addicted to pain medication while trying to manage chronic pain. Your pension was delayed by bureaucracy. You lost your home, your savings, everything." He picked up the case file, scanning the details he'd initially dismissed as just another sad story. Medical debt totaling $47,000. Workers' compensation denied on a technicality. Pension application under review for 2 years. Homeless since March of this year. Harrison set the file down and looked at Daniel with something approaching awe. "And despite all of that, despite everything the system has done to you, you pled guilty. You took responsibility. You didn't try to excuse your actions or blame anyone else." Daniel stood straighter, finding some echo of his old bearing. "Because stealing is wrong, Your Honor, even when you're hungry, even when the system fails you. Right and wrong don't change based on circumstances." "No," Harrison said quietly, "but justice should account for circumstances. And justice, Officer Brooks, has failed you completely." Judge Harrison removed his robes and stepped down from the bench. In front of the entire courtroom, he walked to Daniel and extended his hand. "Case dismissed," he announced. "Officer Brooks, it's time someone returned the favor you did 20 years ago." Judge Harrison looked around the courtroom at the prosecutor, the public defender, the court staff who had witnessed hundreds of routine hearings. This was not routine. This court finds that while the defendant is technically guilty of the charges as filed, the circumstances surrounding this case demand a different kind of justice. He picked up his gavel, then set it down without using it. "Officer Daniel Brooks, you served this city with honor for 30 years. You saved my life and countless others. You suffered in service to your community, and that community failed you when you needed help the most." Harrison began removing his judicial robes. "Case dismissed." The words echoed through the stunned courtroom. The prosecutor started to object, then stopped. The public defender looked like she'd never seen anything like this in 15 years of practice. Harrison stepped down from the bench and walked to where Daniel stood in handcuffs. "Bailiff, remove those restraints." As the cuffs came off, Harrison extended his hand. Daniel stared at it for a moment, then reached out slowly. "Officer Brooks," Harrison said as they shook hands. 20 years ago you saved my life. Today, I want to start returning that favor." He turned to address the courtroom. "I am ordering a full review of Officer Brooks's pension application. I am personally calling the mayor's office to expedite resolution of his workers' compensation claim. And I am declaring a recess in this court until I can ensure that a man who served this city with honor is no longer sleeping on the streets." Daniel's eyes filled with tears, the first emotion he'd shown throughout the proceedings. "Your Honor, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Harrison replied. "You already said it 20 years ago, when you put yourself between me and a bullet." As the courtroom began to empty, Harrison made good on his promises. He called the mayor's office from his chambers. He contacted the police pension board. He reached out to veteran service organizations. But most importantly, he kept his word about ensuring Daniel wouldn't sleep on the streets. 6 months later, Daniel Brooks sat in a comfortable chair in Harrison's den, reading the morning newspaper. His pension had been approved. His medical bills had been covered by a retroactive workers' compensation settlement, and his PTSD was being treated by a specialist who understood police trauma. Harrison entered with 2 cups of coffee, setting one down next to Daniel. Housing application came through, Harrison said. Nice apartment on the north side, close to the VA hospital. Daniel looked up from his paper. "Michael, you've done enough. More than enough." "I'll never do enough," Harrison replied, settling into his own chair. "That night at Tony's store, you didn't just save my life. You saved my career, my family, my future. Everything I became started with your courage. And everything I lost started there, too," Daniel said without bitterness. "Funny how one moment can change everything," Harrison nodded. "But look where we are now, both of us different than we were that night. But both of us still here." "Still here," Daniel agreed. That afternoon, Daniel moved into his new apartment. As he unpacked the few belongings he'd accumulated since becoming homeless, he found his old Medal of Valor at the bottom of a bag. He'd carried it with him through everything: the PTSD, the addiction, the homelessness. He set it on his new dresser and smiled. For the first time in 20 years, it felt like something to be proud of rather than a reminder of a night that had haunted him. A year later, Daniel Brooks stood before a group of at-risk youth in a community center on the south side of Chicago. He wore a simple suit and a calm expression as he told his story, not the sanitized version of heroism, but the real story of service, trauma, failure, and redemption. Justice isn't just about punishment, he told the young faces looking up at him. Sometimes it's about giving people a second chance. Sometimes it's about recognizing that good people can make bad choices when they're desperate. In the back of the room, Judge Harrison listened with pride. He'd started a foundation to help homeless veterans, inspired by Daniel's story and funded by his own savings. Daniel had become their first success story and now their most effective advocate. After the presentation, as they walked to their cars, Daniel turned to Harrison. "You know what the best part is?" Daniel asked. "What's that?" 20 years ago, I saved your life without knowing who you were or what you'd become. Last year, you saved mine the same way. Neither of us was trying to balance some cosmic scale, we were just doing what was right." Harrison smiled. Maybe that's what justice really looks like. Not a balance scale, but people choosing to help each other when they can. As they drove away in separate directions, Daniel to his apartment, Harrison to his house, both men carried with them the knowledge that sometimes the most important cases are the ones that never make the newspapers. Sometimes justice looks like a judge removing his robes to shake the hand of a man he wronged. Sometimes it looks like a homeless veteran who still believes in doing the right thing, even when the system has failed him. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, justice looks like the opportunity to repay a debt you never thought you'd have the chance to settle. Where are you watching this video from? Don't forget to leave your city in the comments as well. Remember, every comment is a voice. Every voice is a change. And what about you? Have you ever encountered such an event or situation? Write in the comments. We would like to hear your story.